And welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur, talking today about the federal election and taxes and how those impact you and me. Also want to talk about our debt. We've got a debt problem in Canada for sure. Our guest today is Franco Terrazzano. He's the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Taxpayer.com is their website, and he's the author of a new book called Axing the Tax, The Rise and Fall of Canada's Carbon Tax. You can get that anywhere books are sold. Amazon, of course, carries it. So Franco, thanks for making time for us today.
Hey, Paul, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it should be a good conversation. Before we get started, put a plug in for your book.
Well, thank you so much, folks. Axing the Tax, the rise and fall of Canada's carbon tax. You can get it now. I wrote this book for two reasons. Number one, Canadians fought back so hard to force the Liberal government to at least back down on their own carbon tax, right? And I just think ordinary Canadians deserve credit because they worked so hard against many elites in the political circles and government bureaucracies and taxpayer-funded academia and in the media. We're all forcing Canadians to pay this carbon tax that makes life more expensive, and it doesn't work. But Canadians never gave up. They kept fighting, and they pushed the government to back down. Now, Paul, that being said, the fight against carbon taxes is not over. And that's the other reason I wrote this book, to show people, where the fight against the carbon tax is going to move in the future as politicians relabel, repackage, and try to force Canadians to pay hidden carbon taxes.
Okay. I gotta always look a little bit deeper, do a little more digging. And I appreciate that about again, the Canadian Taxpayers Association or Federation, pardon me. You guys do some research and you get in there, try to make things happen. So, much appreciated. Taxpayer.com. All right. Well, why don't we start right off with that carbon tax? Of course, we know the consumer carbon tax was reduced down to zero, although I understand that it's still on the books. So, again, you're talking about the future. Whoever wins the election could, if they feel it's warranted, actually just start to ramp that up again, and the consumer carbon tax actually hasn't disappeared. But the industrial carbon tax is still there. So maybe explain, how that works. Again, this is again labeled as being for the big polluters, and that you and I, the little guys, aren't going to have to pay. It'll be those guys paying, and I think this is maybe what you're talking about, the hidden tax. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, you laid the framework very well. So let me just take a step back and bring in what the major parties are proposing. Okay, so
Sure.
Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, they're the only major federal party that is committed to ending all carbon taxes,
Okay.
getting rid of the consumer carbon tax, getting rid of the law, getting rid of the industrial carbon tax, which is the hidden carbon tax on business. But then there's also another sneaky form of carbon tax that the Trudeau government buried in fuel regulations that makes life more expensive. And Poilievre is also on record saying he would get rid of that carbon tax. So get rid of all carbon taxes. Now, Carney is a little bit sneakier, if I can put it that way, right? So as you mentioned, he brought the consumer carbon tax rate to zero, but the law is still on the books. So after the election, after those politicians are done singing for their supper, knocking on your doors, they could go back into the House of Commons and crank the carbon tax back up. But where we really have to watch out for, Paul, is, in my estimation, is the hidden carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax, right? And now Carney, he's very clear that he doesn't want to scrap carbon taxes. He wants to change carbon taxes. That's his word. And so he wants to hit Canadian businesses with carbon taxes, and he hopes that Canadians won't notice when that makes their life more expensive. But look, a carbon tax on refineries, well, that makes gasoline and diesel more expensive. A carbon tax on utilities makes home heating more expensive. And a carbon tax on fertilizer plants, well, that increases costs for farmers, and that makes your grocery haul more expensive as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, and you just follow that path. I mean, I've never met a businessman who says, okay, the government's putting this extra tax burden on me, so I'm just going to eat that and make less money. No, you pass it on to whoever your clients are, and you charge them a bit more to cover that. That's how business works. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just common sense, isn't it?
Well, there's actually a worse option as well, right? Because it's not just higher prices, because you have to think about the global context right now. Mr. Trump has been very clear, right? He wants manufacturing, he wants industry jobs in the United States. Well, the US, the White House, doesn't impose a carbon tax, right? So not only would Carney's carbon tax make life more expensive, but Carney's carbon tax on business will push Canadian businesses to cut production in Canada, increase production south of the border, and even set up shop south of the border, right? So all of that means fewer jobs. So really, Carney's carbon tax on business is the worst of all worlds: higher prices and fewer jobs for Canadians.
Wow, that's something I think most people haven't considered. Yeah, very interesting. I know you had a poll recently as well. I think it was a Leger poll on this industrial carbon tax. So what did that poll show us?
Well, okay, so Carney is trying to sell Canadians on his industrial carbon tax. He's trying to claim, oh, don't worry, folks, it's just going to be the big companies that pay for it. So we wanted to ask Canadians, like, what do you think of that claim, right? And the poll commissioned by us, done by Leger, a reputable polling firm, they found that 70% of Canadians said that businesses will pass on most or some of the cost to consumers,
Hmm.
right? In fact, only 9% of Canadians believe, Carney, that businesses will pay most of the cost. So look, the polling is very clear that Canadians understand that it doesn't matter what you rename or relabel or repackage a carbon tax. A carbon tax is a carbon tax is a carbon tax. And when you hammer businesses with carbon taxes, well, they're going to pass on those costs to consumers through higher prices. So essentially, Canadians aren't buying what Carney is trying to sell on the carbon tax.
All right. Well, government accountability, always an issue in any kind of election. Mark Carney certainly under a lot of pressure to reveal his assets to Canadians, and that, of course, came up in the debates as well. And so one of Poilievre's recent announcements was to tighten financial transparency rules for elected officials. And I think, again, people from all different political stripes would probably agree we need to tighten things up. In fact, actually, Poilievre's actually been criticized for not maybe even going far enough in that. How accountable do we need to keep our politicians here, that they need to prove, okay, I don't have hidden investments somewhere else that I'm going to get benefit from here?
Oh, of course, politicians should be held accountable, right? And I mean, they are elected representatives or overseeing budgets that are hundreds of billions of
Yeah.
dollars. So, like, they have to be held to a very high standard. But I will say, we actually need to see more transparency and better taxpayer protections across government, not just for the politicians, but across the bureaucracy and
Hmm.
across the departments and crown corporations. Now, let me give you an example. I'm sure your audience has heard about all the taxpayer funded bonuses that the CBC has been handing out, right? $18
Yes.
million, $18 million in bonuses last year, all paid for by the taxpayer. $132 million in taxpayer funded bonuses going out to the CBC since 2015. Now, what your audience might not know is that the CBC also has about 7 or 8 senior executives. So, not just the executives, but the senior executives. Now, the Canadian Taxpayers
Okay. And
Federation, we filed an access to information request to get the bonuses going to the senior executives. However, the CBC has been stonewalling that information. So we had to launch a legal challenge with the Information Commissioner's Office to force the CBC to disclose that information. But here's the thing: you shouldn't have to rely on an advocacy organization like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to get that information, right? That's taxpayers'
absolutely.
money. Taxpayers deserve to know how our money's being spent. So I'm glad you brought up accountability for politicians, extra transparency. But look, we need greater transparency and accountability across the entire federal government. And I think that CBC example illustrates that point.
For sure. And you mentioned bureaucracy. Well, that is certainly a huge issue. I mean, we need to cut red tape, and we've got all kinds of federal regulations of business. We can talk about that. But even reducing debt, I mean, that's something I haven't heard a lot about in this federal election. We've got like a massive, massive debt. I think it's around $1 trillion, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. But our bureaucracy has grown over the last decade. I think by 43%. Somebody recently told me it was like 90, for every 90 Canadians, we have a federal employee somewhere, So I'm going, boy, that seems a little high, don't you think?
Well, it is extremely high. I mean, the number of bureaucrats in the federal government has increased by 43% over the last decade, right? So Trudeau has added 108,000 extra government bureaucrats in
Wow.
less than a decade, as you mentioned, about a 43% increase. But that's just the number of bureaucrats, okay? The cost to taxpayers has ballooned significantly more than that because not only are you paying for a bigger bureaucracy, you're paying for a bigger bureaucracy taking bigger paychecks, right? The Trudeau government in the last 4 years alone handed out 1 million pay raises. The federal government has rubber stamped more than $1 billion in bonuses since 2015, despite the fact that departments barely meet half of their own performance targets in any given year. Now, you add the fact that the government massively increased the size of the bureaucracy, has given out pay raises, has given out bonuses, and Paul, get this: the cost of the bureaucracy has gone up 73% in less than a decade.
That's crazy.
73%. That's a 73% hit to taxpayers. And like, look, the obvious question is, well, are you getting 73% better services from the federal government? No. Maybe 73% longer wait times, but definitely not better services.
Wow. And, I'm thinking the 73% raise might be nice here, too. I don't know. How many of us have got a raise in the last, 2 or 3 years? Probably not that many of us, right? So something's
Yeah.
out of whack here for sure. A lot of this election, too, Franco, has been about how to deal with U.S. tariffs and Donald Trump, right? How does the Canadian Taxpayer Federation view the retaliatory tariffs that most of our federal leaders are talking about doing here?
Well, I understand people's emotion when Mr. Trump announced the tariffs, right? I understand when you think of a bully coming at you, or if that's the way you see it, you want to hit back, you want to strike back.
Yeah.
But the problem with tariffs is that it's a tax on yourself. That's how tariffs work, right? So when Mr. Trump imposes tariffs, that's a tax on American businesses and on American consumers. Well, the opposite is also true. When the federal government in Ottawa imposes knee-jerk retaliatory tariffs, that's a tax on Canadian businesses and a tax on Canadian consumers that we can't afford. So my look at this is twofold. Number one, look, if the US wants to hammer Americans with higher taxes, that doesn't mean Ottawa should hammer Canadians with higher taxes. And number two, I'm not saying don't do anything. Instead, we should be growing Canada's economy. We got to look internally. We've got to cut the massive amount of red tape that has been stalling Canada's economy for years. That's made it, almost impossible to attract investment for major natural resource projects here in Canada. And then we got to go on a massive tax cutting campaign. Paul, we rank 31st out of 38 countries on income taxes compared to our peers, our industrialized peers. 31st. That's
Wow.
awful. That's awful. We rank 26th on business tax competitiveness. And you know what? On both measures, the US is more competitive than Canada. So, if we want to outcompete the United States, we gotta look at ourselves. We gotta not ourselves. We gotta look at our governments, and we gotta cut massive red tape, and we gotta go on a massive tax cutting campaign.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an election issue, but this is quite serious, like you say. Our global world has changed with Donald Trump in power here, for better or for worse, love him or hate him, but things are changing quite quickly. And, the global competitiveness is absolutely key for Canada to prosper. And we can get into the whole, pipelines thing as well. I mean, that's key to this. But taxes, okay, so who's promising to cut taxes from our federal parties here? I know both the Conservatives and the Liberals have had, some tax cuts that they're proposing. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Well, on income tax cuts, I mean, Polyev is promising more than twice as much as Carney,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So, yeah, so more than twice as much in tax cuts, income tax cuts coming from Polyev as compared to Carney. So, let me just break down the promises, right? So, Carney is promising to cut income taxes for a two-income family that would save that family about $800 a year.
Hmm.
Polyev is promising to cut income taxes that would save that family about $1,800 a year, right? So Carney promising $800 for the family in income tax relief. Polyev promising 1,800. So on income tax cuts, I mean, Polyev is promising twice as much more relief. But not only that, Polyev is also promising additional relief for working seniors, right? So he's going to let working seniors keep an extra $10,000 of their income tax free. And I think that's going to help seniors who are working because, many seniors who are working, they're doing so because they're struggling to pay the bills. So
Hmm.
letting them keep $10,000 extra tax free is a good move. But, let me actually go to where I think maybe the biggest tax announcement for the economic growth of our nation. So Polyev said that he's going to defer capital gains taxes if you reinvest that money into Canada. So that is
Ah, so
huge.
specifically, it's got to be invested in our nation.
Yep, yep. It has to be reinvested into Canada. So
Hmm.
that's huge, right? Not only do you get to defer the big capital gains tax, which is a financial sucker punch to people who worked hard to create a business or save for their retirement, but then to encourage people to reinvest back into Canada, help Canadian businesses, help Canadian investments. Like I think that could be a real game changer here for our economy.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, again, you want to keep that business here at home as a big part of this whole election campaign, right? And invest in Canada, save the taxes. Good plan for sure. Okay, and it is so strange in this election to see so many seniors. It's kind of flipped around, right? Seniors normally support conservatives, but now they seem to be polling toward supporting the liberals, and younger people supporting the conservatives. So what is up with that? Are the liberals offering something for seniors at this point with tax breaks or anything like that? Like, what's driving that?
Well, let me just take a little turn here and talk about something that I think is on mind of both seniors and younger generations, and
Okay,
that's housing affordability,
right.
right? Now, let me lay the groundwork here. In Canada, we currently don't have home equity tax, right? So that
Right.
would be a tax on the proceeds when you sell your home, the home you
Hmm.
live in. Now, we currently don't have one. However, the Trudeau government has been flirting with home equity taxes for years, okay? The Trudeau government spent about $450,000 of our tax dollars studying and promoting home equity taxes. Okay, in 2016, the Trudeau government brought in a reporting requirement. So if you sell your home, you have to tell the CRA how much you sold the home for. Well, isn't that curious, right? If the tax man ain't taxing your home, then why does the tax man need to know how much you made from the sale of that home?
Good
Now, I'm
question.
highly skeptical, but I think all Canadians should realize that that reporting requirement is the fundamental first step for a government to impose a home equity tax. Now, a home equity tax that would particularly harm seniors, right? Because so many Canadian seniors work very hard their whole lives to have a home and to build equity in their home, which they will use to fund their golden years. Well, a home equity tax would be a sucker punch to that nest egg for seniors, but a home equity tax would also make it more expensive and harder for younger generations to buy their first home. So, a home equity tax is one of those taxes that would very much affect both seniors and younger generations. Now, on this, let me just say, Mr. Polyev is the only major party on the record saying he would remove the reporting requirement with the CRA.
Hmm.
So kudos to him because, as I said, he would remove that first step that the government would need to impose a home equity tax. And as far as I can tell, I haven't heard Carney say anything on the record about the reporting requirement or home equity taxes.
Okay, that's yeah. These are questions we need to be asking our politicians. And yeah, if that's important to you, right? I mean, and again, in all fairness, too, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I mean, I know you're putting a lot of positive spin here on Poilievre's policies here, but I've seen you guys criticize conservative policies, liberal policies,
Yeah.
NDP policies, whatever it is. You guys are basically out to protect the Canadian public from,
Yeah.
taxation, right, and debt
Yeah.
and these kinds of things. So, hey, let's touch base on the NDP for a moment here. I know we're talking about housing. Of course, they've got big plans to build houses, but it's government building houses in their plan, and so that's going to be coming from tax dollars. Any thoughts on this? Again, anytime we hear tax dollars, well, free, anything free from the government isn't really free, is it?
Yeah. What is it? The seven scariest words in the English language is "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." You know what I mean? I mean, look. When it comes to affordability, especially housing affordability, like government is not the solution. Government is the problem here, right? Like,
Hmm.
if more government spending meant that more Canadians would own a home, if that was really the case, then every Canadian would have 7 homes by now, because governments have been spending crazy amounts of money creating housing bureaucracies, housing agencies, and things are more expensive. Look, if we want to make homes in Canada more affordable, it's simple. We have to get governments out of the way. We have to get the high taxes on homes and home builders out of the way, and also the regulations that are stopping them from building homes, right? Like, look, home developers want to make money. They will build homes because Canadians want to buy homes. And the
Hmm.
more homes they build, that increases supply and that reduces the price of homes, right? It's that simple. Government is not the solution. Governments, all levels of government, are the problem by charging high taxes, high fees, and crazy amount of hoops that these construction companies, home builders, have to go through to actually build a home for people to buy. Right. So, and look, like the NDP is announcing a lot of big spending items, but it's almost like they're so divorced from reality. Like, as you mentioned earlier, the federal government is more than $1.2 trillion in debt. There
Hmm.
is no money.
Yeah, you can't just keep printing money. It causes inflation and all kinds of problems. I mean, now the liberals, I think, have talked about getting federal. I'm not sure. Was it federal loans to like a modular housing company? They want to build a lot of modular homes, right?
Well, it's we still have to look for all the details, but it looks like they want to create another housing agency. But
Yeah,
like, I hate to point this out for them, but like we already have a Crown Corporation, a housing agency, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation,
yeah,
and you'll remember they've said this many times that their overarching objective is housing affordability for all. Well, how are they doing? Not very good, and yet, like, look, since the beginning of 2020, they've handed out more than $100 million in bonuses since the beginning of 2020. The government housing agency, all while Canadians can't afford homes. So, like,
yeah.
look,
That is not.
no, yeah, we don't
Yeah,
need
that
another housing bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean, how can we justify that? Your tax dollars, my tax dollars, going for bonuses to an agency that's obviously failing, right? I mean, it's just beyond ridiculous. Now, on the bright side, there are some GST cuts promised from both the Liberals and the Conservatives on new homes. Do you want to unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah. So again, both providing relief. Polyev is providing more. Like, look, like it's just balls and strikes. It's just the math, right? So what Carney wants to do is he wants to eliminate the GST for for first time home buyers
Okay.
up to a threshold of $1 million. Okay. So Carney would take the GST off of homes up to $1 million for first time home buyers. Now, Polyev is expanding the relief, right? He was actually the first one to propose this type of policy, and he would essentially give more relief to more people, right? So Polyev would take the GST off of all new homes up to $1.3 million. So a higher threshold, and more people would receive the relief from Polyev, but they are both promising sales tax cuts on homes.
Okay, and I think there was some sort of a municipal uh, fee that places like Toronto are charging quite high fees apparently with home builds. I think up to $100,000 with all kind of the red tape that they have in various municipalities. And I believe Polyev was saying that he would pay up to 50,000, half of that basically. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I have those details, but here's what does have to happen. I mean, look, it's not just the federal government, right? It's the provinces and it's really the municipalities as well that make it very hard and very costly to build homes. So, like, whoever is going to form the next government, yes, you absolutely have to cut the housing bureaucracy in Ottawa. Yes, you have to cut the federal taxes and regulation, and well, really the federal taxes that are making home building more expensive. But we also have to figure out a way to get the provinces and municipalities on board here to let people build and buy homes.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears just briefly here on Very interesting proposal from the Conservatives. Poilievre talking about making major cuts to foreign aid spending and instead use that money to invest into protecting our Arctic, which does need protecting for sure. I mean, he believes that a lot of these dollars end up in the hands of some shady characters. Are we spending too much on foreign aid?
We are wasting so much money going overseas. I mean, look at home. How many people are struggling right now, right? Lining up in food banks, worried that they don't have enough money coming in to pay the bills, right? And another thing is the government is more than $1 trillion in debt. So not only are Canadians struggling back home, but the government has no money, okay? And then you look at the amount of money that the government is spending overseas. In the last year, 2022, where records are available, the government spent $15.5 billion, $15.5 billion on foreign aid. Let's put that in perspective, okay? Through the entire Department of Veterans Affairs, they spent $5.5 billion. So the government spent almost 3 times more on foreign aid as it did through the entire Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay. And it's not just the huge sum of money, which it is. It's not just the context where the government is broke and Canadians here are struggling, but it's also the waste. Okay. Global Affairs Canada may be the worst waste offender in the entire federal government, and that's saying a lot. Let me just give you one example. Okay. Global Affairs Canada is billing taxpayers $51,000 a month on booze.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
I wish I was.
Oh, man. You could probably give us a long laundry list of just government waste. And of course, and I want to encourage people to go to your website to check that out as well, taxpayer.com. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we get rid of our debt and think what could government spend that money on? Hospitals, care that we need, all these kinds of things. I want to put a plug in for your book here as well. Axing the Tax, The Rise and Fall of Canada's Carbon Tax, available anywhere you buy books. Thank you so much, Franco, for just shedding some light on this here today for us.
Hey, Paul, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on your show.
You bet. All right. WizeUp.ca. Tell your friends about us and don't forget to hit subscribe.